Thank you for watching. My name is Glen Morgan, and this is We the Govern. So we have a special guest in the studio with us today, and an opportunity, as always. It's good to have Representative Jim Walsh back in the studio here. And today we want to talk about, maybe if you don't mind, just talking about education, the direction education's going, concerns with the post-COVID world with collapsing test scores, and concerns about curriculum and parents being woken up to the real problems that they see in their kids' education right now.
Sure, Glenn. I mean, it's an evergreen topic, and it's always worth talking about. As your viewers will remember, our state constitution in Washington talks about basic education, which most people interpret as K-12 education, as the paramount duty of the state government. It is our paramount duty to provide a high-quality basic education to all the kids in the state of Washington. Now, it's always a debate about how do you best do that.
Right.
And we get sometimes the issues of school choice, very controversial, charter schools, also controversial, maybe a little less controversial, and special ed, how we handle IEPs and other types of special ed programs. It's a big basket of issues. But the most important thing, and you just touched on in your first question here, is very recently, the proficiency testing in this state, the results have been terrible.
Even worse than, it's not like they were great before, but,
Right.
but they just plummeted.
Right, and the school closures during the COVID outbreaks are definitely a part of that, but really the trend was troubling before the COVID shutdowns happened. And very recently, the proficiency numbers were approximately 2/3 of kids in our public school system fail the proficiency testing on math. 2/3 fail.
Right.
You know, as someone joked, that's almost half.
Right.
2/3 are failing the math proficiency, and all joking aside, about half are failing the English language, the reading and writing portion.
Right.
These are terrible numbers. I mean, bottom handful in the United States.
Right.
Terrible numbers.
And it's not like the requirements are that. I mean, proficiency. I mean, we're talking about baseline, basic level functionality in society, and to not even be able to achieve that with all the money, and especially all the increased money that's been put into the education system.
The amount we spend on K-12 education, depending on how long back you look, has basically gone up by 50%, or if you go back far enough in recent history, it's doubled. So between 50% and 100% increase in our spending.
All to make test scores worse.
Go down.
Yeah.
And now some may watch this video and say, well, very recently, the last numbers, they came up like a little nudge.
Yeah.
True. The very recent numbers were a little better than 1/3 for math and a little better than half for reading and writing, but those are still horrible numbers. Horrible.
Right.
And we need to figure out how to solve this problem. And there are a lot of different ways to look at it. I mean, I myself am an advocate of school choice, but that's a very difficult, complicated equation. But one of the things I think that school choice, whatever form it takes, and a lot of Washington families now are looking down to Arizona, which just implemented a very broad public school choice program, but other states too, where there are more limited versions. What the Washington families are looking for is some way to improve the performance, some way to improve the education that kids are receiving. And there is maybe no perfect way to deliver a high quality basic education to every child. Maybe every child to some degree has to find that way himself or herself, or the families have to find the right way.
But it's not even the search for perfection. It's almost like it's difficult to even find the search for barely adequate.
That's correct.
And so even that is, I mean, that's the one thing that's so frustrating, I think, to this whole process.
And I think it's insult to injury to many Washington families that while we're staggering and stumbling and not getting to adequate, we're filling the child's day with things that aren't essential to basic education.
Right.
comprehensive sexual education, and the basket of fashionable values that we know as critical race theory. These are distractions.
Which doesn't exist, right?
It's very that one's you're right. The official line is there is no critical race theory taught in Washington public schools, and in a extremely narrow legalistic sense, that's true. There's not, but we did pass a law in Olympia. It was a party line vote, so I didn't vote for it, but a few of my colleagues did. That requires critical race theory training to be part of professional education for teachers, K-12 administrative employees, and, troubling to me, newly elected school board members have to go through this training.
Well, and a lot of it's things like I've even noticed some recent textbooks that have been introduced into the school system, and it doesn't, when they change an upgraded textbook, it doesn't even really hit the high profile level at for the school board even. And yet they've gone back, the textbook manufacturers have gone back and they've changed words and they've changed history, and they go back and instead of European settlers, it's white colonizers, and then claiming that somehow the native tribes were down with the LGBTQ plus agenda.
Because the Two-Spirit.
The Two-Spirit, and all this other stuff.
Tribal Native Americans did have this notion of Two-Spirit, but it isn't exactly what the current fashionable people are saying. I mean, this is true, but it's definitely kind of warped with a modern perspective, projected back into history, which is always a dangerous thing to do. A little Orwellian, although I'm often criticized for bringing up George Orwell. But this whole idea of using today's cultural standards and mores applied to the native tribes or to the original colonists or whatever the case might be is a fool's errand, because you end up with a very warped sense of what actually happened.
And this is where this diversity, inclusion, equity kind of thing goes into play in the Dei Agenda, right? It's always about you can't be woke enough. And whoever's woke today with whatever the theory is, tomorrow you'll be a racist because you won't have gone extreme enough down that road that 2-3 years from now will be vogue or in fashion at that time.
Yes, the critical race theory and the DIE or DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion mantra are a kind of lay religion. I mean, they are a system of moral probity that is non-religious. It's a religion without religion. It is the structure and orthodoxy of a religious belief without the religious belief.
Yeah, because it has all the trappings of religion. You can be excommunicated, right?
Correct.
You can be, you can buy indulgences, right? You're allowed to commit certain penalties, and you can buy your way out of it.
By the way, those are all the worst parts of religion.
Excommunication
and the buying and selling of indulgences.
So it's taking like the worst elements of any religion and then putting it all in there, pretending like it's not a religion, and then shoving it down everybody's throat as the new modern religion that's being pushed this way. And this is reminding me of this LA City Council situation.
They were in the news.
Right. They were in the news recently, where these Democrat city council members who are all down with the diversity, inclusion, equity agenda, right? But they felt that gave them the ability to be complete and total open racists when they didn't think they were being recorded, and they were completely willing to be that way. And obviously embarrassed when that finally came out a little bit, because even for them it started to become a bridge too far. But feeling like they could say things like that or be openly racist with each other because they're all on the inside, right? They're all in this club, and therefore they're allowed to be. It's like this indulgence idea of because I'm an elected Democrat, therefore I can be a racist.
If you say the right things, you can think the wrong things because you're saying the right things. I mean, this is what Martin Luther started the Reformation against, was a decadent church that as long as you put on the right airs, you could be a horrible person. This is my concern about critical race theory as applied to this mandatory teacher training, mandatory school employee training, mandatory school board member training. School board members need to be kind of fiercely independent. We count on them to think in the best interest of their wards, their charges. Who are the kids? Who are the students? We want those locally elected school board members to fight fiercely for the kids, and getting them trained up in this orthodoxy of a religion that's not a religion, I think is a distraction from the necessary and good work that we want them to do, which is giving that best education to those kids.
And of course, we see this in higher education. This college. I mean, I saw it when I was going to Columbia. Where you had this tendency to almost revert to some kind of historical pushing ideas that I thought were horrible and terrible, like segregation. Right? They're actually pushing for racial segregation now in higher education, in events and clubs and activities and
graduations. Separate graduations. It's horrible.
Like separate but equal. I mean, what the hell?
We saw it a little bit with COVID. We saw some separate but equal stuff where the pro sports teams were trying to have different sections for people who could show they had a shot and those who didn't have a shot.
Right.
It is so the proponents of this stuff like to use the term equity lens. We are going to look at this issue from an equity lens. And unfortunately, the equity lens is the wrong prescription for actual good, colorblind, post-racial society where we can treat people, dare I say it, on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. I think that's where we want to go.
But if you say that now, you're a racist.
Oh.
And that's the thing that I mean, even making the direct quote to Martin Luther King now is considered racist.
And we've gone from Martin Luther to Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
I several times in Olympia in the legislature on King's birthday, which usually happens right near the beginning of the legislative session, most years, I've been able to speak on the floor during the King birthday recognition, and all I've ever done is gone back and found some of his early sermons and take a little snippet of it and read it. I don't say anything in my own words. I just use some of King's words from early on, and he was I mean, I know you know this, Glenn, but he was a well-read, really smart guy. He was well-versed, obviously, in the Bible, but he knew philosophy. He knew, he was a deeply profound man. And when he spoke of a colorblind society, it really was speaking to our best angels as a country, as a state, and as individuals. And I cherish that so much. Now, a little later in his life, King got a little more conventionally political and a little more socialist leaning, but I absolutely think he was on the mark in those earlier sermons where he talked about the inherent foibles of human nature, and we need to aspire to get past these meat sacks that we're in and think about our spirit and our souls and our better selves. And we need our education policy to follow that vision, not some bent lens of fashionable.
And then meanwhile, they're not able to make change at the store, and the math collapsing and
or bend a pipe.
Or just do anything.
I went a little while ago and looked at the training center, vocational training center that. NECA and the IBEW, the electrical contractors and the electricians union jointly run. And it's great. It's very geometric, literally. I mean, bending pipe, setting up wiring. It looks almost like art, how these young kids are learning how to be master electricians. There is math in doing that.
Math is real.
And we need to give our kids a better grounding in math, so whatever they do, they can do it well.
Math isn't racist as much as they might want to claim it is in modern education, which is
only when you're looking at it through that cracked lens.
And that is a horrible situation to be in, and I am fearful for the future generations who are
we're going to do better, Glenn. We're going to find our way. We're going to get those test scores up.
Well, unfortunately, I hope we're able to address it in time to not lose too many kids to this disastrous approach to education that unfortunately the inside establishment seems to be pushing.
Glenn, the parents are waking up. The
Yeah.
grandparents are waking up. I'm very encouraged by how grandparents groups are taking more charge of being involved. And as others have said, those mama bears, the mothers in this state of young kids, are waking up and being more assertive about what they demand
Sure.
of our public education system, and that is a healthy thing.
It is. So if you want to make a difference in your local school system, get involved and be engaged, pay attention to what is going on. And even if you don't have kids in the public school system, they're still educating your neighbor's kids. So make sure you're paying taxes to fund it. Get involved, be engaged. The future does belong to those who show up, and you need to show up to make a difference. So pay attention and get involved and engaged. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.